What's up guys, it's Rusty with TatLogic. Today we're going to talk a bit about stencils and how to prepare them digitally, and I'm going to go over a few different techniques with you and explain the benefits of each one. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so we're in Photoshop here, and I have pulled up a previous design that I did for a client. This, as you can see, has a lot of detail and it is realism, and because of that I opted to use the Photocopy filter that comes in Photoshop. It's this really handy tool that analyzes the image you've made and creates essentially a workable stencil for us. And the way that you activate that is you go up to Filter and you click Filter Gallery, and that's going to bring up a bunch of different gallery options for you. I happen to have the Photocopy filter selected already. And if you look in this little window here, I'll zoom out. In the lower left you can zoom out, so I'll zoom out a bit. If you look at this window here, you can see the projected image, like what it's going to be once I hit OK. So I'm satisfied with that, it looks fine to me. Hit OK, and now it's going to apply that to our image. So I have the design on the layer beneath it and the Photocopy filter on the layer above it. So you can compare between the two and see that, you know, even if we get down in here into this helmet where it gets kind of really cluttered, you can still see that the Photocopy filter is preserving almost all of the detail. It does a pretty good job, it's pretty accurate, and it's really helpful for stuff like this shield. So if you were to do this shield by hand, it would take a really long time, and you wouldn't be 100% accurate because these are perfect circles, and you know, it would just take you forever. So this is a really helpful, quick way to do that. And you can use it for more stylized stuff as well, but I prefer to do things by hand if they're a little bit more simple and they don't have geometric stuff going on. And if you want to see that approach, I have it right here. And this one I actually drew from the beginning, so I actually have the line art available, and that's really helpful for me because I'm much more familiar with it, you know, because I created it. I know where all the details are, and I know where all the troublesome areas might be, and I've already figured out a lot of the problems myself. So if we take a look at the line art, it's very clean. I don't have a lot of that noise that comes with the Photocopy filter. I'll just hop back to this other one so you can see what I'm talking about. So we get a lot of this like noise, and there is a texture there. There is a texture, but this is just a little bit more clear for me. So when I come in here and I do all these feathers and everything, I'm going to be basically in charge of how that texture looks, and I'm not going to be fighting with the Photocopy filter on like what actually is there and what isn't there. Instead, I'm basically at liberty to make the creative choices myself. And so when you're making a stencil, basically you just need as little or as much information as is beneficial to you. So this is enough information for me to work with comfortably, but you definitely could have even less than this, you know. So like this background, for example, there are like clouds and stuff like this in here, but I don't need to be hyper precise on these clouds. I just know that they're back there, so when I go in and I'm tattooing, like I don't actually need to see like where the edge of this cloud is. I'll just put a cloud back there myself. But for something like the eye and like where these talons are and everything, it would be pretty difficult to just wing that while you're on the skin, so it's better to have those details locked in on the stencil. I did do a Photocopy filter on this just to compare it, so you can see how the Photocopy filter reacts with a more stylized design. You can still work on this, it's definitely workable, but some of the troublesome things is like, so this isn't a line right here where this like feather is. It gives you this kind of shaded thing. I prefer to have lines because they're a little bit more precise. So like if I were to tattoo like right along the edge of this, it might be a little inconsistent because I'm not following a really precise line. So that's why I would prefer something more clean like this. I have a couple more examples I want to go over here. So this is just a portrait image that I pulled off of Google. Now, one of the problems that the photocopy filter will run into really comes up with stuff like hair. So hair, you have all these tiny little strands, and the filter will try to pick them up, but what it gives you is kind of a mess. So you can see it's like, okay, yes, like the hairs are there, it's showing me that they're there, but when you're tattooing, you're not going to be tattooing every single strand. And if you were to color just like this, if you were to do this, the hair would look like this instead of looking like hair. You would have these like black spots in here, and you're losing some of those like flowing elements of the hair. So as long as you know that, and you've done a lot of time drawing, and you're pretty experienced, you can still work with this, but you'll have to manually compensate for the missing details of like the flow of the hair. Some other things where the photocopy filter does come a bit short is their value representation. So the colors that it goes off of are based on the colors you have selected in the lower left here. So I have black and white, so that's what the photocopy filter is using, black and white. If I had red and white, it would be red and white, and so on. But because of that, I'm not getting a large like variation in value. It operates either black or white and nothing really in between. Sometimes you'll get some of this weird like ghosting, but I'll show you the issue that comes up. So if you look right here on her cheek, this is a really light shadow. It's not nearly as dark as, say, like the left side of her face here. But the photocopy filter has made it almost black, like all the way black. So if you were to tattoo that as dark as the photocopy filter shows you, you would have a huge mistake here. It would look like a blemish, and it would be almost irreversible. There's not a lot you would be able to do with it. So when you're tattooing and you've put the stencil on, this part of your stencil is going to be really dark. And if you need to make a light mark in that area, it's going to be hard to see on the stencil, and you're going to want to wipe, and you run the risk of wiping away other details. So usually in a case like this, if I were to use the photocopy filter, I would erase this and then put my own information. But what you can also do is just draw the stencil yourself. Now, in the eagle example, I drew this from scratch, so I already had the line drawing before I put all the shading and everything. But in the case of a portrait, like somebody brings you a picture, you might not want to use the photocopy filter because of the problems that I mentioned, and you might want to draw over the top of it. So here's what that looks like. So here is my stencil, or what I might use for this portrait. And all I did to make that is I pulled up the picture, knocked down the opacity a bit, and then I traced over the relevant details. Now, your stencil probably doesn't look like this, or it might look close. It might have more detail, less detail. That's completely fine. It really is just up to you, like what is enough detail for you to be able to make a good piece. So for me, this works. I've indicated the shadows and some of the light areas, as well as the detail in the eyes. What's important to note is the hair. So this is like really loose. So when I do the tattoo or the drawing or whatever, you're not going to be doing every strand of hair. You're not, like, it's just, that would take you a million years. You're not that accurate. You're never going to be that accurate. And so instead, what we do as artists is we represent the hair. So we do something that when you look at it, you go, oh, that's hair. And it doesn't have to be a one-for-one copy of your reference. So I know that, okay, out here, there are light strands. So in my stencil, I leave that kind of open, but I say, hey, like there's a light strand there. So I know, okay, when I'm looking at my reference, I know that this area has some strands coming off of it. And that's basically all there is to it. Put enough detail in there that you don't get lost, but keep it loose enough that you still have the freedom to make creative choices. I want to compare what we use as stencils to what they use in academia. And I have an example from the Watts Atelier, if you're not familiar with that. It is basically a school for fine arts in Southern California, and they are really, really, really good over there, and they focus on realism. And this is a lay-in of basic light and shadow. And what he has is he has the, the portrait here and the fabric and everything, and he's blocked out in these areas, these shapes here, where the shadows might be. And all I did was I came over and I just put shadows in all the areas that he had blocked off. And you can see that immediately the image starts to resolve into something that feels more 3D. And he's doing the same exact thing that we do. He's just blocking out all of the areas that he thinks are relevant and necessary for him to refine the image further. So whereas he does this soft charcoal line, we're doing a dotted line, and so on. So the skills that you use in drawing and fine art directly translate over into tattooing, and you can see that on display here. Alright, I think that's all I have for today. Hopefully you learned something. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have other methods for creating stencils or easier ways to do it. I'm always trying to learn, and that's what this is about. So thanks again, and take care.